Everyone. Today's daf is daf Nun Gimel 53, and we are up to 3 lines from the bottom of Nun Bet Amud Bet. So 3 lines from the bottom of the last daf, and the question that we're going to discuss is this whole question of what happens with the extra details in the ketubah. The one we're specifically talking about is this ketubah of Benin Dichrin, right, where basically a man marries a woman. She brings into the marriage a certain number of assets that her parents' house, her father contributed to her. And there's a condition that all of those assets stay with her children in the event that there are children from multiple wives, and then the husband dies, right? So, the wife dies first. When she dies, all her stuff goes to her husband. Then the husband dies, and all of his stuff go to his children, male children. And so the question then is, can we sequester, can we set aside the money that she brought in? So that's typical, and that's what's done. And we do it in order to encourage fathers to give money to their daughters. Otherwise, they'd be nervous about giving it because they don't know who's going to get it, benefit from it. But if they have some confidence that it's going to go to their own grandchildren, they'd be more willing to spread the wealth. Says the Gemara today, 3 lines from the bottom. Rav Papa Yasigle Lebre Be Abasura. Rav Papa went to make a shidduch for his son at the house of Abasura. So Abasura had a daughter. Rav Papa wanted this daughter to marry his son. So they had sort of agreed on it, and they had to go and figure out the details, like negotiate the wedding, and which is what we would do nowadays, but negotiate this nedunya, this amount of money that Abasura was going to give his daughter to bring into the marriage. Interesting point, Rav Papa was also married to the daughter of Abasura, so he was his father-in-law. But it must have been a daughter from a different wife, because it can't be his wife's sister. But his son was going to marry them. And Azal Michtav Ketubata. So he went to the house to negotiate this ketubah. Shama, I've never married off a child, but I imagine these are very sensitive and stressful times. So we'll see the story. Shama Yehuda Bar Merima. Yehuda Bar Merima, who was a Rav in the town, I guess Abu Surah lived in, heard that Rav Papa was coming to visit. And he went out to meet him. I guess they were old friends. Nafik Atta, he went out, he found him in Chazilei, and he hung out with him, he walked with him, he accompanied him. When they got to the house of Abasura, this person, Yehuda Bar Merima, said, okay, I got to go now. It's time for me. I can't go in with you. Amrlei, so Papa said, what do you mean? I want you to come with me. Neil Mar Bahadai. I really want you to come in with me. And we understand, we'll see from the story, that he thought it might put a little pressure, right? So sometimes when you ask people for money, if you have other people in the room, they're more likely to be generous. So we ask for donations in public. So if Papa really wanted to bring this person in with him, but he didn't want to come. Top line of Nun Gimel, he saw that he really was not interested in coming with him. Amrlei, so if Papa said to his friend Yehuda Bar Merima, my daitach, why? So let's try to understand, why in the world are you so reluctant to come in with me? Basically, I want to use you to better my negotiating position, right? I want you to be there. You're a respected person. You're a local leader. And so Abba Choza will feel a little guilty in your presence of saying, I can't afford it. I can only give $20 kind of thing, right? You know him, you'll put some pressure on him. So just by your presence. So why are you nervous about that? Maybe because Mishum, as we say in the second line, Damalei Shmuel Rav Yehuda, because Shmuel once said to his student Rav Yehuda, Shinina, remember Shmuel called Rav Yehuda Shinina, the sharp one, Lo tahavi ba'avuri achsanta. Don't get involved in passing over, in basically changing the structure of Yerusha. Meaning the Torah has very specific, rules for how someone is Yoresh. Obviously, people have the ability, if it's your own money, to change that. You can give your money to someone else. But Shmuel said to his student, Rabbi Yehuda, be careful about that, because very often you make a mistake, right? You think, oh, there's a really good cause. This son is so much better than all the other children. Let's give all the money to that person, right? But said Shmuel, afilo mi bra bisha le bra tava, even from a bad son to a good son, right? A person has, very son who's not following the path and is doing something, and another son who's doing great stuff. You shouldn't be so rushed to assign Yerusha to one or the other. You never know what's going to happen. You're thinking about this generation. Who knows what's going to happen 5 generations from now, or even the 1 generation from now. right? So you people think that they understand who's good and who's bad, and it's obviously not so simple. And it's not just that person; it's their future forever. So maybe that's why. Sorry, Kolshkemi brother Barton, certainly from a son to a daughter. So maybe that's why you don't want to come in, because you don't want to pressure Abba Chozah to give money to his daughter, who's going to marry my son, says Rav Papa, because let the world do its own thing. I don't want to get involved in these things. Says Rav Papa, but still, this is a Kanta Drabanani, right? This we quoted yesterday, that it was a Kanta Drabanan, which we quoted yesterday, that a man is supposed to give money to his daughters. So Amarle, well, what's his name? Yehuda Bar Merimar said back, no. I have no problem with a man giving money to his daughter to help her ketubah and her sons ultimately. But that's if the person wants to do it. But what's going to happen here is I'm part of a pressure campaign, right? You're bringing me in to increase the level of stress on him so that he gives more than he wanted to give. I don't want to be part of that. To force him to do it. Nami, I don't want to do that. Amar Lei, so he said back to him, I didn't tell you to come in and put pressure on him to make him give more. I didn't tell you to come in and pressure him, Abba Chozah, to give more, Abba Surcha, sorry, to give more money. I just want you to come in and don't do anything. Just be my, my accompaniment. We're in the middle of a story, around 10 lines down from the Gimel and Aleph. I'll do it very briefly because it's a very good story. Where we're talking about writing this, you give extra money in the Ketubah for the Benin Dichrim, right? The Ketubah Benin Dichrim for male children, meaning that you want the father-in-law to give money to his daughter in the Ketubah, and he'd be nervous to do it because if he gives money to his daughter, it's going to end up, if his daughter dies first, it all goes to the husband, and then it gets redistributed from the husband to all of his children and doesn't stay in that family. So you have a special clause that if she has male children, all of the money that she brought into Ketubah goes to her male children and is not shared with all the other children of the husband. So there was a story that Rav Papa was going to negotiate the Ketubah at the house of, for his son, in the house of Abba Surcha, whose daughter his son was marrying. And he bumped into his friend, Yehuda Bar Merimar, who was a very respectable person in that town, was walking with him, and Rav Papa was trying to get him to come into the room for the negotiations, presumably in the thought that in the presence of this person, the guy would be more generous, right? Like people generally are, right? And this person didn't want to do it. Yehuda Bar Merimar said, I don't want to force him to give more money. Let the guy do what he wants to do. And so Amar Lei, so he said to him, look, I don't want you to force him. I just want you to come with me. So he said, now around 10 lines from the top, Amar Lei, but Yehuda Merimar said, look, Ma'alai didi, me just walking into the door, hainu asiya, sorry, that's pressure, right? I don't need to even say anything. Just the fact that I showed up, if the rabbi walks in and they're asking for money, you're going to, treat it very differently than if just the Mashiach comes, right? And so my presence is pressure, so I don't want to go. But Rav Papa was very convincing. Rav Papa achfe, so literally means he forced him, but he convinced him. He wouldn't let him go. And he went in. But Yehuda Bar Merimar said, I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to advocate for anything. So ishtik, so he was quiet. He went in and he was like, I'm just going to be a fly on the wall, the yativ. And he sat on the side, just sitting there with no expression. Now, of course, when that happens, the owner of the home thought, oh, Yehuda Bar Merimar is here, and he's not saying anything to me because he's angry with me because I only offered $100,000. He wants me to offer more money. So Savar Hahu, the person in the house, Yehuda Abba Chozah, Abba Surcha, I keep calling him, Abba Surah, he thought, Mirtach Ratach, he's angry with me because I'm offering $20,000. And I say, okay, $50,000. So Ketiva the Chomai Dahabilai. In the end, he kept going up and up and gave everything he owned. So he turned over, he wrote every single thing that he owned, Abba Surah, to his daughter in her Ketubah to marry the son of Rav Papa. L'sof, now at the end, he gave it everything he had, and still this person was not talking to him. Yehuda Bar Merimar was quiet. Amar Lei said, Hashanami lo mishtoi mar. You still won't talk to me. I swear I didn't leave anything for myself. Right? I wrote every single penny I owned to my daughter. How come you're not happy now? Amar Lei, so Yehuda Bar Merimar said, oh, you read me entirely wrong. I didn't think you should give her anything. Right? Even your first offer, your $10,000 offer was too much from my perspective. I'm just here because Rav Papa made me be here. So Amr Lay, so now Abba Surah was like, oh, wait a second. Hashtanami Ahadari, let me maybe I'll change the conditions. Maybe I'll go back on my commitment to give $100,000. Amr Lay, so Yehuda Bamarim said, no. Shavi Nafshach Hadrana, you'll turn yourself into a what do you call it? Someone who no backsies, right? Someone who takes things back. They'll know you as a hadrana. Hadrana means someone who's hadran, who reneges on his word. So that you shouldn't do. Lo kamina. I won't go that far. So basically, you see the rule of unintended consequences when you have pressure in these sort of marriage situations. And again, I can imagine this is very common and stressful in these negotiations in terms of who's giving what and how much is coming across. Anyways, that was that story. Continue the Gemara now, a third of the way down. Rav Yemer Saba asked Rav Nachman a very interesting question. Let's say, remember, a man marries a woman. He writes a ketubah which says, if I divorce you or if I die, I pay you, she's a betula, let's say 200 zuz, and I also have to give you food, and I also have to give you clothing, and I also have to pay your doctor bills, and I also have to redeem you, right? All these conditions. And we said in the Mishnah now, and there's ketubat b'nin dichrin, so any money you bring in goes to your sons. And if I die, says the husband, and you die, or not you don't need to die. If I die, all of your daughters who are not married still get supported, right? All these conditions go in. But let's say the woman decides to sell her ketubah, right? A ketubah, as you can imagine, is like any other lien. It's like a loan. It's a mortgage document that says that the husband has to pay this in the event that he dies first or divorces her. She needs money, let's say, and she needs cash. She wants to invest in some big business, so she mortgages her ketubah. The question is, and she's allowed to do that, and she's not really allowed to stay married to her husband without a ketubah, so it's not so simple. It could be that they're separated. It could be that he dies. Either way, she sells her ketubah. The question is, what about the rights of the children, right? She sells her ketubah. Let's say, remember, you only get a ketubah if the husband dies first, right? So let's say she sells her ketubah to an investor. Ketubah says 200 shekel, right? She sells it for 100 because you never know who's going to die first, right? And then she dies. So the husband does not pay a ketubah when she dies, right? So the person who bought this loses completely. The question is, what about her children? Does the ketubat b'nin dichrin still apply? Or do you say since she sold her ketubah, the ketubah is null, right? What about the other clauses of the ketubah? So this is the question that we asked. So said Ba'amine Rav Yemer Saba from Rav Nachman, Machra ketubata liba'ala. Let's say she sold it to her husband. She didn't sell it to a stranger. She really wanted money, right? She wanted to buy a brand new airplane or something, I don't know. And she says to her husband, I don't have any money. I'll sell you my ketubah, meaning the rights to my ketubah, and give me $100,000 or whatever. So yesh la ketubah b'nin dichrin olo. You get rid of the clauses of the ketubah to protect her children or not? Says the Gemara. Amalei Rava said, Rava, well, that's an interesting question if she sold it. But what if she was mochelet? What if she just said, now I sold it to you? Well, let's say the husband, right, he has a field. He can't sell the field to anybody because everybody knows that since he has a ketubah to his wife, if he sells the field and then he dies 2 years later, they're going to give the field back to his wife. So he says to her, look, I can't do anything. We're starving to death. She says, okay, I'll forgive you the ketubah. That just sounds like I'm so smart on her end, but I guess she had to do it. So she gives up basically her right to the ketubah. So what about that case? So Amr Lay, so he said to him, look, Hashta mocheret kamibayle. I asked the question specifically in the case where she sold it, which apparently she got something out of it. We'll see, right? Sorry, one second. She got something out of it, right? So the Afagav the Ikla Meimana, you might have thought Zuzi Ansur, she needed the money, right? She desperately needed $1,000 to redeem her father or her grandfather, whatever the reason she needed money. And so she was forced to sell it, basically. She felt pressure to sell it because she needed money. Damina, so I might have thought, it's like she was saying, look, we said this earlier, it's like you hit someone 100 times with the strap, meaning you're forcing her to do it, and therefore she's not giving up all her rights. She just is giving up what she has to, right? But mochelet mi boy, I didn't ask the question about mochelet. There, she's giving up with getting nothing in return. And so there, she's much more likely to give up all her rights because she's not being forced to do that. So that was what he said. And said Rava, pshitali, seems obvious to me, said Rava, that mocheret ktubata la'acheri, if a woman sells her ktubah to an outside investor, that yesh la ktubat b'nim dichrin, that she does definitely get a ktubat b'nim dichrin remains. Why? My taima, because zuzi ansuha. We say that the money forced her to do it, right? She only sold her ktubah because she was desperate for money. And again, why, it's not so clear, but she wanted to buy something, she wanted to send her kid to college, whatever people spend all their money on nowadays. So she felt pressure to do it, but she didn't want to give up her rights of the ketubah. She just had to get value out of what she could get value out of. But so there it would remain the ketubah b'nim dichrin. If she's mochelet ketubata leba'ala, if she forgives her ketubah to her husband, then says Rava, ein la ketubah b'nim dichrin, because she's basically saying, I give up all my rights in the ketubah. And even the $100,000 I brought in from my father's house, I write that off. It goes to my husband. I'm going to give him whatever rights he wants. And then it will be redistributed among all his children. So my taima, she was mochel. She gave it up. But what about by Rava? The question I had was the middle case. What if she's mocheret ktubata liba'ala, if she sells her ktubah to her husband? So she didn't sell it to a stranger. She sold it to her husband. Is that kimocheret la'achim dami? Is that equivalent to selling it to a stranger? Oh, kimochelet leba'ala dami, or is that similar to forgiving her husband the ketubah? So selling it to her husband, is that she's just basically giving up all her rights to ketubah, or is she just, she feels I need the money, my husband is available, I could do a deal with my husband easier than someone out there who I don't know, and so she's doing it out of duress because she really needs the money. Now, Bater Debaya, after Rava asked the question, Hadar Pashta, he said, I think I figured it out. That in fact, mocheret ketubah leba'ala ki mocheret la'achirim dami. If you sell your ketubah to your husband, it's equivalent to selling it to somebody else, meaning you are basically not trying to give up on your ketubah. You just are stuck. She needs the money, right? That's proof, for whatever reason, she's desperate for money. And so she sold her ketubah to get that money, but she didn't want to give up all the other rights that are included in the ketubah, including the ketubah b'nim dichrin. Mativ Ravidi Beravan. Ravidi Beravan asked a question from the following case. It says, Meita. Now, this was a case we all learned in Daf Yomi around 3 months ago, very complex case, 2 months ago even, 3 months, I guess, where, remember the case was the very, very interesting and complex case of where a woman finds out that her husband went away and died, right? And there's only one witness. So we said, usually you need 2 witnesses, but we're very worried that this woman's going to become an agunah, and that she'll never be able to get remarried because there's no one who could testify what happened to her husband who went out to the Wild West to explore. And so we say that if there's a Ye'ed Echad, or the woman herself, she can testify that her husband died. And she's allowed to remarry based on that testimony. However, we put all kinds of responsibilities on this woman to check, to verify. And one of them is that if it turns out that her husband didn't die and he comes back, she can't stay married to her original husband. She can't stay married to the new husband. She's an Eshet Ish, right? And she doesn't get a ketubah from either one, we said. She loses her ketubah from the first husband. She doesn't get a ketubah from the second husband. And if you recall, we asked in the Gemara in Yevamot, what do you mean she doesn't get a ketubah? There's no ketubah, right? She's not married to the second husband. Or whatever. We said she lost her ketubah. And we say it's referring even to the ketubah b'nim dichrin. Right? Even if she goes into that marriage with her own money, she loses that money. Right? She doesn't lose the money, but she loses control over the money. So says the Gemara in Yevamot, now we're quoting, Meita, if the woman dies, right? So then, Ein Yorshin Shelzeh, Ein Yorshin Shelzeh, Yorshin Ketubata. Then neither her children from the first husband, who she thought died, or her children from the second husband, who she married illicitly because she was mistaken, neither one of them get the ketubah. Now, first we asked, what do you mean they get the ketubah? A woman doesn't get a ketubah if she dies. A woman gets a ketubah if her husband dies, right? So Avinama, we asked, ketubata, my avidite, what ketubah does a woman get if she dies? And Rav Papa explained it was referring to the ketubat b'nim dichrin. But it's referring to if the woman dies, remember the whole way the ketubat b'nim dichrin works is that if the woman dies, all of her property, including the $1 million she brought from her father's house, goes to her husband. Then when her husband dies, that property goes to his children. And the Ketubot b'nim dichrin says that the part that came from the wife goes to the wife's children only, not to every other child. So that's what we said in Yivamot, right? So we said that if a woman gets married al pi Eid Echad, and then it turns out that she was wrong and the husband was really alive, and then she dies, her Ketubat bin Dichrin is forgiven. It doesn't happen. It doesn't go to her children. So why? Why do you cancel it? Right? Amai, why don't you say Hachanami Lema Yetzer Ansa? Right? She was forced essentially to get the second marriage and to give up on her first marriage because her Yetzer, well, it's not clear what Yetzer means, her desire to be married, her distress that her husband had died, but she didn't do it willingly, right? She didn't want to get rid of her first marriage. She was convinced that her husband was dead. So why do you make it that she loses her Ketubat B'nin Dichrin? Well, that's not a same case. That is a knasahu the kansu Rabbanan. That's a specific knas, right? The Rabbanan didn't do it based on her desire to give up on her marriage. They did it based on the fact that we want her to check. And so we have to raise the bar for her. And by raising the bar for her, we make it that you will lose your ketubah if you get married inappropriately. Yativ Ravin Bar Chanina, Kameder of Chisda. Ravin Bar Chanina was sitting in front of Reb Chisda. Yativ Kamer Shmei Reb Elazar. And he was saying in the name of Reb Elazar that Mochelet Ketubata Leba'ala Ein La Mizonot. Right? We've been discussing until now today the question of Ketubat B'nin Dichrin. What happens to the money that's supposed to stay for her male children? What about the other rights of the Ketubah? Right? One of the rights of the Ketubah is that you have to feed your wife. Right? You have to give her money, food. So what if a woman says, "I'm mochel my Ketubah. I give it up. I reject any claim to the ketubah." Does she also lose money? Does she also lose the ability to get food? Right? Now, most understand, obviously, that when her husband's alive, there's no mochelet, right? Meaning the husband has to provide for the wife. That's the midor, right? The Torah says that the husband has to give her, right? Sherak sutav onata. So he definitely has to provide for her when she's alive. The question is, what if he dies, right? Remember, when a husband dies, the heirs of the husband have to give her mizonot. But what if she said, "I don't want my ketubah"? She basically rejected or gave up her ketubah. Do the heirs still have to give her mizonot, right? So that was the question. He said, Reb Elazar, ein la mizonot. So he said, there's no mizonot. They no longer have to give money to her from the estate, okay? Because it's a Tanai ketubah. Right? It's a condition that, to remember, was our Mishnah, was the third condition, right? That a woman who's widowed, she continues to eat and a farnes until she gets remarried, right? So that was the Tanai ketubah. The fact that you gave up your ketubah, you also give up all the clauses in the ketubah. Now, so this is what Rav Chisda said in the name of Reb Elazar. Now, Ravin Bar Chanina said to him, Amar lei, if you hadn't told me this in the name of a great person, meaning the name of Reb Elazar, I would have said this is ridiculous. I would have said, this sounds like the pasuk in Mishlei. The pasuk says, "Meshiv ra'ah tachat tova." The person who gives evil in place of good, someone does a nice thing for you. This woman forgave her ketubah. Her husband was having a little trouble paying for it, right? So she said, "Okay, I'll mocha my ketubah." And now you're punishing her, but not only not giving her ketubah, but not even giving her mizonot, right? So says the pasuk in Mishlei, "Lo tamush ra'a mi beito." No evil won't leave that house. It's a pretty big curse, right? So I would have thought that it's really inappropriate. So that's just his comment. Now, Yativ Rav Nachman Ula v'Avimi by Rav Papi. Rav Nachman, Ula, and Avimi were sitting v'Yativ Rav Chia Ami Gabayo, and Atahu Gavra d'Shchiva Arusato. Very interesting case. A man got married to a woman. He did erison, which is the kiddushin. Remember, she stays in her father's house until a year or so later when they do the nisuin. The husband is usually required a ketubah at that point, even though they're not consummated the marriage, but he doesn't necessarily write the ketubah until right before the nisuin. And she died. So they were engaged and she died. And the question was, he said to him, Hai gava d'shchiva arusato, his arusa died, and he said to them, Amrle zil kavar or havla ketubata. You have to do one of two things. Either pay off the ketubah, now, which sounds bizarre, because when a woman dies, the husband does not pay ketubah, she's dead, right? Remember, the ketubah is when the husband dies. But he said to him, either pay the ketubah or pay for the burial, meaning basically you have to pay for her burial in replacement of having to pay for her ketubah. Had she not died, you would have had to pay a ketubah, right? She did die, so you've got to pay for her burial. Amrlahu Rav Chia said to Nina, look, I learned a Breita. The Breita said, Ishto Arusa, a man's wife who's an Arusa, meaning a man has erison and has not done the nisuin yet, Lo Onein, he's not an onain for that wife, meaning he's not fully married to her. So if she dies, remember halachav onein is that a person whose close relative dies, doesn't do mitzvot and doesn't do other things when they're in front of them. That doesn't apply in this case. And if he's a Kohen, he can't be metamet. Remember, the Kohen's metamet to his wife, but not to this woman, not to Narusa. And she doesn't observe this stuff for him. Meta, says the Braita, if she dies, Eino Yorsha, he does not Yorish her because she hasn't come into his marriage yet. And Metu, if he dies, Govek Tubata, she gets the Ketubah, even though she's only an Erison, right? Now it says Rav Chia, Tamra de Metu, that implies that she only gets the Ketubah if he dies. But Hameti, if she died, in la Ketubah. And so why are you saying that you have to pay to bury her or you have to give her a Ketubah? This Braita clearly says you don't get a Ketubah if she dies. My timer, so Amar Voshaya, because She'in Ani Koreba Likit Tinasi La'acher Titli Masha Ketuv. Right? What we said in the language of the Ketubah is when you marry somebody else, you take what I wrote for you, right? And since you weren't married, right, it was only Erison, the clause of the Ketubah does not come into play. So that's what Rav Chia said. Kiata Ravin, when Ravin came, he said in the name of Reish Lakish, Arusa Shemeta, the bottom line on Nun Gimel, a woman who was engaged, so again, we keep calling it engagement, but did Erison, and then she died, Ein la Ketubah, there's no Ketubah paid to her or to her estate. Amrle Abai, now Abai did not like that, and he said, Zilu Amrle, go and tell them, Shakilu Tivutech Shadya Achizri. Take your claim, basically, you think, or take your tova, take your favor. You think you're doing us a favor by telling us something, and throw it out to the chizri, right? Throw it out to the street. You're not doing us any favors by quoting this Braita. We already figured this out. Rav Hoshai already said that that's in fact how it works. That a woman who is only Erusin does not have a right of a ketubah because the language in the ketubah says when you get married, tinasi. And so that detail of the ketubah that a husband has to pay for the burial only applies at a later point once you actually consummate the marriage through nisun. Okay, complicated clauses. We're going to keep going. So we're now on the top of Daf Nun Gimel Amud Bet, and the next case of the Mishnah was a next clause in the Ketubah, was that even if you don't write it, this applies because it's a T'nai Beit Din, that basically a man has to make a commitment that any Binan Nukvan, any female daughters who you have from this marriage, if the husband dies, the estate has to pay for their upkeep, for their nourishment and clothing and regular things that you pay for as if the husband was alive, right? And that's a T'nai in the Ketubah. Binan Nukfun, I will furnish them, I will support them until they get married. Now, Rav said the quote of our Mishnah. Remember, our Mishnah said the words yesterday. I'm going to read the Mishnah. They will stay in my house. They will get my money ad tilachun leguvran until they get taken by men or until they get married. Okay. Now that's what Rav said. Top third line now on the top of Nun Gimel Amud Bet. Rav taught in the Mishnah the words we just read. Ad tilachun leguvran until they get married. Levi had a different version. Rashi points out here that Levi often had his own Mishnah, where Levi taught basically his version of the Mishnayot. And in Levi's Mishnah, he wrote, Tni ad tidbagrun, until they get older, until they become a boger. So the Tanai is not until they get married, it's until they become a boger, which is say 12 and a half, and they're out of the father's house, the estate no longer has to pay for them. Now, the Rav says, well, is that possible? Rav, afagav de bagar. According to Rav, even if they're old, you have to pay for them. I mean, they're adults. You don't pay for adults who are 12 and a half. I mean, it's a very respectable age. Support yourself. And Levi, afagav the insim, and Levi says it only matters on their age. It doesn't matter if they get married. You know, if a woman's 10 and she gets married, she doesn't stay in her father's rishah. Ella, no. If she's bagar velo insav, if a woman is 12 and a half, even if she's not married, or if she's insav velo bagar, she's married and she's not old enough yet, the kuli amalo pligi that she goes out of her father's estate and the estate no longer has to pay for her food. Ki pligi barusa velo bagar. The question is, what if she got engaged, but she's not 12 and a half yet? So according to according to Rav in our Mishnah, then she still gets supported by her father's estate. This is because she hasn't yet gone to Nisuin and married her husband. But according to Levi, since she's already married, quote unquote, she's a Rusa, she no longer gets supported by the father's estate. The father would have supported her, but the estate does not have to support her. And this, in fact, is how Levi read the Mishnah, where it said, Ad titbagrun, until she gets old enough, and it becomes time for them to get married. Tarki, you don't need both. You don't need to get married and be an adult, right? Ella o titbagrun, o yimtus manehem l'insuven. She either becomes a bogeret, so she's by age, she times out, or she it's time to get married. I don't think so. It could, it sounds interesting, but Boger literally means to grow up, right? That's what a Boger means. I don't know if it's from the same word as Gever. I don't think so.
It's not the same word, but it's the same letters.
It is the same
Gimel, Reish. Just like
someone misspelled. Let's see. Okay. So it says where Kitnai. In fact, this is a machloket Tanaim of Ad Matai Habat Mizonet. How long does a daughter get supported by the estate of the father? Ad Ares, until she gets Erisin, which is what Levi seemed to say, and Mishum Rabbi Elazar Amru Ad Bager, until she becomes a Bogeret. So one implies that Erisin is enough, and one implies that Erisin is not enough. And Tani Rav Yosef, you know what Rav Yosef said in his Mishnah? He said Ad de Yehavyun, until she becomes Havaya, literally means possession or proper, not property, but possession of someone else. So until she enters into a new relationship. And of course, that's very non-specific. What does entering into a new relationship mean? So we asked, Havaya de Erisin, does that mean entering into a relationship of Erisin? Oh, Havaya de Nisuin, and we take it, we don't know the answer. So Rav said it has to be Nisuin, Levi said it has to be Erisin, and Rav Yosef used a very neutral word, which can mean either, and we have no idea what he holds. So we take it. Now, Amalei Rav Chisda to Rav Yosef. Rav Chisda asked Rav Yosef the following question. Mi shamia lecha minei de Rav Yehuda, right? Rav Yosef was a student of Rav Yehuda. And so Rav Chisda was trying to gather information about what Rav Yehuda said about Arusa. There's a daughter who's a minor, because if she's an adult, it doesn't apply. She's a minor, she's engaged to someone. The question is, yesh la mezonot or ein la mezonot? We just saw a big machloka between Rav and Levi, right? A 10-year-old girl whose father died, who's betrothed to another man. Does the estate still have to pay for her or not? Which obviously has huge questions, because who's buying the wedding, right? Does the state have to pay for her wedding? Does it have to pay for her nourishment? So these were all big questions. And so he asked, Rav Chisda asked Rav Yosef, did you hear from Rav Yehuda? And what Rav Yosef said, no, I didn't hear from Rav Yehuda. But I'll tell you what I think anyways, right? Amar le, mishma lo shmieli. I didn't hear anything from Rav Yehuda about this. Ela misvara, I would tell you my conclusion after considering this is letla. She doesn't get any money from her father's estate. Because kivan de irsa, since she's heiress, since she's engaged, lo nichale de titza, her future husband will have a responsibility to give her money, because he doesn't want his future wife to be destitute, right? So basically, he accepts the responsibility for her, and so therefore the father's estate no longer needs to provide for her. So that was what Rav Yosef said back to Rav Chisda. Amalei, Rav Chisda said, look, I didn't ask for your opinion, right? I asked if you heard from your Rebbe. If you didn't hear it from your Rebbe, then I don't really want to hear what you think. Misvara itla. I would say from Svara the opposite. You can argue that she should get from her father's estate. Because kimla bigava, since she's not yet married to this man, she's only engaged to him, he's not going to throw away money for nothing. Meaning, I guess it happens all the time that you get engaged, but you don't consummate the marriage, right? Things come up, there's time, there's details that happen. And so until it's done deal, it's not a done deal. And so maybe the person is not going to want to give money for nothing. So it's just a svara. Ikadami, and some say the opposite. Amalei, they said to him, I didn't hear from Rav Yosef. I didn't hear from Yehuda. Mishma lo shmieli, but misvara, I would say itla, that in fact she does get money from her father's estate. Because because the husband, the future husband, is not going to give her money. The fiance is not going to throw money when he's not sure if he's going to consummate the marriage. And so, in this version, Rav Chisda said back to him, Amalei, look, If you didn't hear it from Rav Yehuda, I don't really care about your svara, because I would say misvara letla. She doesn't get it because kivan di irsa lo nichale de titsa, because since he's already betrothed to her, he doesn't want her to be destitute, to be zold, to be cheapened, and so he's going to give her money so that she doesn't starve or can't pay her bills. And so basically, you can make an argument either way. And if you didn't hear it directly from Yehuda, we just don't know the answer. If you're just making it up, you can't prove one way or the other. Okay. Whew. The final sugya for today is there's a siman, because we're going to see 5 different cases. The siman is Gavri, Sak, Zaraf, Mana, etc. Let's keep going. But these are 5 cases where we're trying to understand how you apply the conditions of the ketubah. So the first case, and these are really each one is sort of they're escalating cases of, I wouldn't say complexity, but of sort of connection, meaning how do you view the connection between the person and the ketubah? What is the first case? They asked Rav Sheshet, Mimma'enet. What about a woman who's Mimma'enet? Remember, the case of Mi'un is where a minor who doesn't have a father, because either her father died or her father already married her off, and so there's no second chance for the father. But we were worried that she's 10 years old and there's no one to protect her in the world. So the brothers or the mother, the people who have responsibility for her, can marry her off to someone. But she has the right to say, I don't want to be married at any point until she's, let's say, 12, right? So let's say what happens is she gets married to Reuven. She decides 2 years later, I don't want to be married to Reuven. And she rejects him. So the marriage is annulled. She comes back home to her mother. And her mother starts feeding her. And the estate says 1 second, right? There's no father here. They're being fed as female minor children. But once you get married, maybe you lose that status. Then we have to keep supporting her, right? Said the question for Rav Sheshet, a mimma'enet who comes back to her mother's house and the father's dead, which almost is by definition, that's what mi'un is, when there's no father. Yesh la mizonot or ein la mizonot. Do they have to support her or not support her, right? Remember, the condition of the ketubah is that if I have female children, that they will stay in the estate, they will get supported until they get married. Well, she got married, but her marriage was annulled, right? So how do you view that? So Amar Lu of Sheshet, well, Tinitua, I have a Mishnah which seems to make it very clear. The Mishnah, the Breita says, Al-Manab de Beit Avia, a woman who's a widow who goes back to her father's house, or a Grusha who goes back to her father's house, Grusha de Beit Avia, again, a 10-year-old girl who's widowed or divorced, who goes back to her father's house, or a Shomeret Yavam de Beit Avia, right, a woman whose husband died, she's now supposed to marry the Yavam, she hasn't happened yet, she goes back to her father's house. All these cases, yesh la mizonot. She gets food from her father. Now her father's alive, we think. Says Rav Yehuda, no. Oda bebeit avia, if she's still in her father's house, yesh la mizonot. Then she gets to be fed. Eino bebeit avia, ein la mizonot. If she's not in her father's house, she doesn't get fed. Now Rav Yehuda's behind the Tanakama. Rav Yehuda's saying if she's at home with her father, right, she gets mizonot. If she's not, she doesn't. That's what the Tanakama said. Ella, it must be that mimma'enet ika beinayah. The disagreement is, what if she left her father's house, she got married, but then she comes back, right? So Tanakama Savar Itla, she's back in her father's house, her mother's house, but her father's house, she gets mizonot. And Rav Yehuda Savar Letla. Rav Yehuda disagrees and said only if she's initially in her father's house, she never left. But if she left, or if she got married, then she's no longer in her father's house. So that's the machloket. That's the first case. The next case, what about Bat Yivama, right? What about the daughter of a Yivama? Fascinating case again, right? So what happens here is that Reuven marries Leah, we're going to say, and Reuven dies without children. Let's stick without children. Leah then goes and does Yibam to Reuven's brother Shimon, right? Now, if you recall, Shimon does not have to give a ketubah to Leah, because Leah gets a ketubah from her first husband, from Reuven, right? The estate of Reuven has to give the ketubah to Leah, because basically, remember, Shimon takes over his brother's house, so he gets the right. So Shimon does not write a new ketubah to Leah. Then Leah dies, right? And all of her money goes to Shimon, her current husband. And then Shimon dies, right? The question is, does the money go to Shimon's daughters, right, from Leah, right? That's benot nukvun. So there's a t'nai of the ketubah that you have to support the female daughters. Follow the case? Right? There's a t'nai in the ketubah that if a person dies, the estate has to pay for the female daughters. But the thing is that Shimon never wrote a ketubah to Leah. Only Reuven wrote a ketubah, and Reuven is long dead, right? So the question is, does Shimon's estate take over the rights of the ketubah and the responsibilities of the ketubah and have to give money to the daughters of Leah? Just to be clear, these are daughters that Leah had with Shimon, right? Because she didn't have any children with Reuven. She had daughters with Shimon, but the question is, Shimon never wrote a ketubah. So what's the halacha? So the Reish Lakish asked that question. Bat Yivama, the daughter of a Yivama, yesh la mizonot or ima mizonot. Says the Gemara, Kivan to Amar, since we said at one point, Ketubot nichse bala rishon, that the ketubah is collected from the first husband, from Reuven, so then the estate of Shimon has no responsibility for these daughters. Then you would say Lethla. Or Dilma, or remember we said in Yivamot that if there is not enough money in the estate of Reuven, if Reuven died without money and without children, right? That Kivan di'i Lethla mirishon, if there's no estate from the first one, no ketubah to give from the first one, Tikimule Rabbanam Yisheni, then they would decree from the second one, from Shimon, then maybe Shimon takes over that responsibility. Itlay and Teko, we don't have a resolution to this question. So fascinating and very important question, and we just don't know the answer. We don't know if Shimon's estate has to pay for the nourishment of the female daughters that come from the Yivamah. Let's do one more, because we have a few more minutes. The next case was Boy Rabbi Elazar. What if it's a bat shni'ah? What if a person marries a shni'ah arayot? Remember, we had in Yivamot that although Torah prohibits many women, the rabbis were not satisfied with that, and they added all kinds of extra arayot. They were called shni'ot, second level arayot. And these are all women who you're not allowed to marry mid-rabbanan, right? It's an isser drabanan to get married. There's no isser min haTorah. So one of them was like a great aunt, let's say, right? So a person gets married to these people, to someone who's an isser to them mid-rabbanan. But there's a ketubah, right? It's not, Torah didn't say that you don't do it. And the marriage is chal, it's just an isser drabanan. So what if they get married and then they die, right? The wife dies, or it doesn't really matter if the wife dies. The husband dies, and they're female children. So these children come from an quote unquote illicit drabanan union, but there is a ketubah. So what do we say? Boy Rabbi Elazar, bat shniya, the daughter from an erva, from a rayot, that's a secondary level of drabanan, yesh la mizonot or ein la mizonot. You have to give money to that daughter or not. So do you say, on top now of Nun Dalan, kivan delet la ketubah, since the mother made a decree, she doesn't get a ketubah because she married someone that she's not allowed to marry. Let la mizoni, so you don't have to feed the children. Odilma, look, the mother got married inappropriately. Ima, the avda isura, the mother did something wrong, so to kansura banan, they made a takana that she doesn't get her ketubah. But the daughters, the poor kids, they didn't do anything wrong, and their parents were the ones who screwed up, right? She, the daughter, told avda isura lo kansura banan. Teko, we don't have a resolution to that question. And one more we'll do just because it's 2 dots. Boy Rava, the last one we're going to do today is what about bat arusa? A man, and this is the case we started with earlier, right? A man and a woman get engaged. They never got married. They never consummated the marriage, right? But they slept together. They had a child. And then he died. The husband died. So does the estate have to sustain and pay for that child, right? Bat Arusa, the daughter that they had when they were only in Irison, do they, yesh la mizonot or in la mizonot, does the estate have to pay to nourish that child? Kiva itla ketubah, remember we said that you get a ketubah from the time of Irison, so presumably then itla, so the kid should get mizonot. Oh, Dilma kiva do tekina rabbanan ketubah shat nisuin, since the requirement for the ketubah, meaning although she gets a ketubah, the only sort of chiyuv of the ketubah only falls when it's at time of nisuin. So since that never happened yet, right? Letla, maybe there's no tanai of ketubah. So although the mother will get a fundamental ketubah, maybe the extra clauses that are all added will not apply. And Teko, we don't have a resolution of that case. And so these are 4. We're going to have tomorrow a 5th one, but 4 of the cases where we're unsure how to apply the Tanai Ketubah. You can see that this is incredibly, incredibly complicated, right? In terms of how you do this legally. And I can imagine there were all kinds of debates because, right, remember, as we all know, any money that goes to one child is not going to another child, right? There's only a certain amount of money. And so there's always a counterparty who doesn't want to give money to that illegitimate daughter, for example, or son even. And so that is where all these cases come up. Okay, that's it for today. Shukrach, everyone. Have a great week.
Thank you. Shavua tov.
Shavua
Thank you,
tov.
Ali. Chodesh Tov.
Chodesh tov.